Hello, my name is Gregory Pichler with the WWHS 78 Wire, and this is Alumni Profiles. Today we are meeting with Jack Deeds. Jack is an alumni of Walt Whitman High School, class of 78. Welcome to Alumni Profiles.
Hey Greg, thanks for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here to talk about the good old days.
Absolutely. For both of us, it's been over 40 years or thereabouts.
Wow.
It's hard to imagine how long it's been. But I just want to go through some demographics. What year were you born?
1959.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I understand you have siblings. How many siblings
I
do you
have 6 siblings. Yeah.
And so, including yourself, you're a pack of 7.
Yeah, I'm the middle child.
Right.
So I'm the best adjusted by all accounts.
When you were attending Whitman, what neighborhood did your family live in?
We lived on Rockmere Court in Sumner, and actually my parents passed away a few years ago, just a couple of years ago, and we just sold the house. But it was a big house. Mom and Dad were in the real estate business, and they moved around. In 1968, they bought the house in Sumner, and it was the model home. It was at the end of Rockmere Court. And during my Whitman years, we built a big swimming pool with a jacuzzi in the backyard, and that became sort of a center place for socializing at my parents' house there in Sumner. So a lot of my friends came by, and we would swim in the pool and hang out in the jacuzzi, and we had a large basement area where we had a lot of parties, big fireplace like the one next to us here. We had big old fires, and it was a great time.
I understand you attended a private school prior to attending Walt Whitman High School. Which private junior high school did you attend?
Yeah, I had an idyllic upbringing. So I went to schools that are no longer in existence. But in my early years, I went to a place that's called La Font Montessori. And it was on the Davies estate, which was like a Hollywood type estate on Macomb Street. It's still there, and it's occupied by the Washington International School. That was idyllic. And then from there, I went to a place called McLean Inverness. There's a McLean school today, but it's not the same school. But that property today is occupied by the Heights, and it was out in Potomac. And it was mostly an all-boys school, and it was really strict, and so when I went to Whitman, I was several years ahead in terms of the education. I went to an algebra class at Whitman, and I just I felt like I was several years. I had already done that training, that education, those classes several years before. So I was at least, I think, 2 years ahead of the other students.
So when you got to Whitman, things must have felt like a breeze to you.
Yeah, and so because of that, it was really the first public school I went to, and because of that, I was like, oh wow, I don't really need to study, and so I focused on socialization, and that was really, in all the schools I went to, it was really strict discipline. It was there was only boys, and so Whitman had a more diverse population of people, and so it was. So I started out with some really serious classes, and very quickly I changed to classes that just didn't require any input, and just focused on socialization.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, if you didn't go to that private school, what junior high would you have attended? What zone were you in?
I think that I would have gone to like a military academy, like Mercersburg or something like that. And I've often thought, okay, what my path would have been different. Perhaps I would have gone in the military. I would have been, maybe I've been in the Air Force or something like that. So, I often wondered if my parents made a mistake letting me go to Whitman, because I was sort of very well disciplined, and I had short hair, and so I went to Whitman. I grew my hair long, and my older brother, who had gone through the public school system, he was doing stuff that I wasn't doing. So I started hanging out with him, he had this 1973 red Chevy van, and he had made it very cool. It had these chrome wheels, they call them Quakers. He had those on. It was sort of jacked up in the back, and he had the inside fixed up real nice. He built it himself, and so I don't know if I had stayed in private school. I think my journey would have been different. But it was fun for me. So so it was basically a 3-year break before I went back to college, and put my nose to the grindstone and started learning again. Or learning different things, I should say. Whitman was more about learning about people and relationships and just really having some fun.
Right. You were one of a few students who owned a car during your tenure at Walt Whitman. What make and model of a car did you drive to Whitman?
Oh, that was fun. So, I had a little business that I created in the neighborhood, first delivering newspapers and then cutting grass. And so I bought my own car. And so it was a 1959 Ford Thunderbird. And it was bright green. And it was an old broken down car. It broke every other day, but it was so cool. It was just different than what anybody else had. And so, you're right. I did have a car, and it broke all the time. And so I ended up driving a lot of different cars, but that was, the car I loved. And essentially, we still have it. It stayed in my garage until a few years ago when my nephew said, "Oh, that car in the garage is so cool." And he hauled it out of the garage. And
you're kidding. You got this car from 1959 that's still in a garage of a property your family owns?
Yeah. I actually gave it to my nephew, who completely overhauled it, and he drives it today. Wow. And he's in his 20s, and maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But in my parents' house on Rockmere Drive, or Court rather, it had a garage where we built it the first time. So it was so old it needed fixing. So we tore it apart, but it was a great learning experience. So I learned how to work on cars at Whitman. I also learned that I didn't enjoy it. You would get grease under your fingernails, and you would bust your knuckles turning up bolts. And where I learned a lot, I also learned that wasn't something that I was really passionate about doing, was working on cars.
So an auto mechanic wasn't in the cards. It wasn't the future for you.
No, I just didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed owning the old car, but I rather it had just worked really well. And so anyway, what happened was my brother built race cars in the garage of my house, and so we took that car and we pulled the engine out and we rebuilt it. But just recently, about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I gave it to my nephew. It had been sitting in the garage forever. They took it back over to my parents' house. They just completely rebuilt it. It was a family project. All my brothers and, I think my father and my nephew, they completely restored it. My brother Mike, younger brother, he worked at the Department of Navy. He took pieces of the car down to the Department of Navy, and they had facilities there for redoing machinery. And, piece by piece, he hauled that Thunderbird into a machine shop in the Navy department and, redid individual pieces. And they put it all back together again. It's beautiful. It's on the road. If you're in Potomac, Maryland, you might see it driving around. Yes, that's my car.
And it's still green.
It's still bright. It's the same color. I had actually given the car to my brother Mike in high school. So once I went on in my life, I actually, the car stayed at Whitman. So it had another generation at Whitman. My brother Mike drove it to Whitman.
This is a younger brother.
Yeah. And so years after I left, it stayed at Whitman, that car did. And isn't that funny? And so anyway, unfortunately, in the parking lot of Whitman, it bumped into another car. And so it looked like it was totaled. But my father and my brother Mike restored it and painted it bright green. And so it's gone through many cycles of being renovated. So from that time, Mike rebuilt it a couple of years after I gave it to him until then he gave it back to me when he moved on. It sat in a garage forever and ever. And I tried to keep up with it, but I had a family. I just couldn't keep putting money into it. And so I had other priorities, and it just sat there until my nephew Zach said, "Hey, what about that car? And I'll pay you money for it." I said, "No, you know what? It's yours." And so I just gave it to him, and he loves it. It's sitting in a garage now out in Potomac. It runs. It's like it's a brand new car today. So if you're out in Brickyard Road out in Potomac, you see an old Thunderbird. Hey, that's my car.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, what I don't remember you with short hair, but I do remember you with long hair. And did you not wear your hair in a long ponytail, like you clasped it up in the back? Is that what I'm?
Yeah, my brother had a ponytail. I looked up to my older brother. It was the thing to do. So starting the year before I went to Whitman, I started growing my hair long, and so my hair was long, and I didn't like it in my face, so I put it in a ponytail. That's the way I kept it most of the time. I thought it was cool, and until I needed a job working for an establishment, it worked. And once I got out of Whitman, I needed a job, and so nobody would hire me with a ponytail, so it had to go.
So you cut it?
Yeah. So only during those Whitman years, but I had very long hair. It was I don't think I cut it at all during the time I was at Whitman, and a lot of the guys at that time had long hair. And
I don't think you were alone.
Yeah.
In wearing long hair.
Yeah. It was cool. I had really long hair. I have some photos I can share with you of. It was well down below my shoulders. When I took it out of the ponytail, it was very. I had curly hair, so it was a lot of hair.
Now, you mentioned something about working during high school. Did you have a job? Did you have like a formal job you went to?
I did. I worked at Mario's Pizzeria on River Road, and that was on Little Falls Parkway and River Road. And during the summers, I worked for builders. So Mom and Dad were both real estate agents, and they hooked me up with a guy named Pat Cullinane, and he built mansions out in the Round Hill, out in Piney Meeting House Road and Piney Glen, those roads. And so I worked on.
Is that out in Potomac?
Yes.
Okay.
It's so if you go out River Road past Falls and you keep going near the Terra development, there's a road called Piney Meeting House, and back in there, Pat Cullinane built. In today's money, I don't know what they would sell for, but they would be up of $5 million homes.
Wow.
Yeah, they probably $10 million homes. I have no idea what they are today, but because I don't think Potomac is selling as well as it used to, but those homes would be on the upper end.
Right. Do you have any particular memories, any anecdotal stories of your time at Whitman that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, Whitman for me was just a time to kind of take a break from school almost. So there was the classes. There were some really great teachers, and there was Mr. Stavasky and Mr. Glass and Mrs. Green, I think, taught biology. And so and there were some really great teachers and classes, and that was fun. But for me, some of the greatest things was thinking about the different cliques and things like that at Whitman that I never got to do before. So they had different divisions, I think. So they had the parking lot, which since I had cars, you could hang out in the parking lot. So there was sort of the parking lot activity and crew. And so that was sort of one thing, and I got to be part of that. And then they had the Hill, which I was less part of, but there are a lot of people. There was this part of Whitman where you went out some doors and up a big hill, and a lot of people hung out on the hill. Yeah. And so I got to go there less, but a lot of people go up there and, just socialize and that was a big thing.
They were skipping class up there too.
Yeah, there was a lot of, I think that was true, a lot of socializing. So it was a different kind of class, and, so I think there wasn't a great discipline at Whitman about going to class, so people took advantage of that. So then between classes, classes had, they were an hour, and then you had 10 or 15 minutes between classes to go to your next class. So there was the quad, and that was the area on the center of Whitman where a lot of people socialized. So that was a really great place to meet people and talk and between classes, and I enjoyed that. And then there was sort of some outside the school activity areas. Like we would go up to Bethesda, hop in your car, we go up to Bethesda to go to lunch. There was a couple diners up there, different places you could grab Montgomery donuts. There was.
Was there a tasty diner up in Bethesda Avenue?
Yeah, there was tasty. There were several. There was a place called Roberts, which was really popular. I think the firehouse is, or no, it's across the street from where the firehouse is today. I think Battery in Wisconsin. That was a big diner there that people enjoyed. And there was little shops that you could go to and so forth. And so we did that. I think one of the outside activities was Carter Park. And this was skipping school. I got great photos of Carter Park. But, lots and lots of people would go there and they'd throw the frisbee. Just there was a big parking lot area and a big field, and frisbee was a big game and a lot of socialization. And during nicer weather, that was the thing to do. So I think, 20% of Whitman was at Carter Park. And so there were different things like that I think that a lot of the Whitman students did, sort of outside the official, curriculum at Walt Whitman.
Right. Yeah, I understand that after you graduated from Whitman, you attended University of Maryland. What field of study did you major in while at University of Maryland?
That's right. So, Whitman had this great thing where they would tell you, based on your grades and so forth, hey, where are you going to go to college? And of course, a lot of people, there was a lot of very successful people at Whitman. A lot of people went on to Harvard or Yale and different things like that. So I'm with the person who's helping you figure out where you can apply at Whitman, and I showed them my grades, and they weren't terrible, but I had a good time. I wasn't focused on academics. And they looked at my grades and they said, well, you did all right, but you know what? I think the only place you can get into is the University of Maryland. And I was like, oh, I'm so devastated. That's exactly where I want to go. And so my father, who had 7 kids, and I was the middle child, he had 3 kids in college. He said, son, I just don't think I can pay for university for him. And so
you mean to attend a university out of town? Right.
At all. He was, go get a job, son.
Okay.
And I don't think I can send you to school. For him, I guess he wanted me to work, and I did. So I got a job as my sister owned a public accounting firm, and I worked for her for 1 year, and that taught me enough about accounting. And so during the time I was at Whitman, when I wasn't after Mario's, I started doing bookkeeping, and my family had a property management business, so we were already doing some bookkeeping at home for some of the properties we managed and so forth. My grandmother had a number of pieces of real estate, and she would have me do rent rolls when I was 15, 14 years old, and so I was already used to that. So I got a job with a printing company in Silver Spring, and that's what paid for my college education, was working at that printing company all the way. So for me, University of Maryland, I lived at home. It's an interesting story. Another Whitman I got a car from. It's a fascinating story, but a sad story too. But that Thunderbird wouldn't make it to Maryland. And so I lived at home, I drove to Maryland, I took classes, it was work study. I was also going to that printing company, and I was their bookkeeper. And so this was before there was even computers, so the very old-fashioned way of, pen and quill and abacus and all that. And so I sort of just did bookkeeping. Some people wait tables. I was a bookkeeper. And so 2 interesting stories. One guy, so I was working a lot. I mean, I just didn't have as much time to socialize in college. And somebody came up to me and said, well, you're a bookkeeper, and I know these guys who are going to school here, and they're looking for a bookkeeper, and they've just started a company, and I don't know if I can get you in, but you'd have to work for free. And I said, oh, you had to work for free? They said, yeah, but, and I don't even know if I can get you in, but, I can try if you want. I said, well, I don't know. You have to work for free, and it's a lot of work, as you're saying. I don't know. And what's the name of this? They said, I don't know. It's online something, America Online or whatever. And so I was
AOL? Was
yeah,
this AOL?
AOL. I could have got in there, but I kicked it back because I had to pay my way, and
Right.
this would have been a volunteerism job. But boy, I missed that ship, right? So, but in the neighborhood, I was cutting grass, and one of my neighbors was the Quinn family, and I cut their grass, and so their son went to Whitman. Ben Quinn did, and as you know, very sad thing, he died in a car accident on River Road.
Okay.
And he had been given a new Monte Carlo. Well, Mrs. Quinn essentially gave me the car she had planned to give to him, which was their 1972 Buick LeSabre. And I drove that through a lot of the years I was at University of Maryland. I drove that car till the wheels fell off. But
Now, just to go back, with Ben Quinn, he died in an auto accident right before graduation. Is that what I remember?
I guess he was a year behind me, so I was 4 years at Maryland. So, yeah, probably right about the time that yeah. So I guess it's a 2-year difference. I'm not sure of the time, but I know I had that Buick after he passed away. Probably maybe very close to that time she gave me that car. So essentially, she gave it to me. It was a good car, but her story was that. This is a car she wanted to give to Ben, and I guess she treated me almost like one of her sons, and I stayed friends with Dave Quinn for forever, and Dave just passed away as well. We've lost a lot of really good friends from Whitman. Anyway, Dave passed away a month or so ago, and I'm still in touch with the family and his sisters, and great family. But it's interesting how so many connecting points there are in our lives,
Right.
and the Quinn family. And
Well, when you were at Maryland, what field of study? What was your major when you went to Whitman? Maryland.
Yeah, Maryland. So it was business administration, and I focused on finance. And I took a lot of IT classes, math classes, and IT classes. So I took COBOL and Fortran, and some of my electives were law, business law, or constitutional law. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I worked hard. I got on the dean's list. I did well at University of Maryland. Mm-hmm. And again, probably not well enough to, get hired by one of the big 4 public accounting firms because I was working. But I got really good experience and finished up in 1982 and graduated. And
that's a normal 4-year program.
Yeah.
But I thought you said you were involved in a work-study program. You still took 5 courses every semester?
I did, and it was hard work. I really worked hard. So Whitman for me was kind of like my break, almost, as it were. When I went over to Maryland, I put my nose to the grindstone. I really worked hard. So I had a full-time job. And I got some student loans, and I paid my own way through school. I got no help from the family at all, other than my father said he wouldn't charge me rent for living in his house, which was nice. But I basically bought all my own food, and I paid my way. I paid my tuition. What was really fascinating was that because of all the socializing I did at Whitman, I got invited to some of the dorms in Maryland. And I saw the kids really for the first time socializing, and I thought, oh golly, we did this 3 years ago at Whitman. You guys are so far behind. But they were drinking alcohol for the first time, doing other things, hugging the toilet and all this at now 18, 19 years old. And I thought, oh, how immature, we did that years ago. So Whitman was a good time growing up and experiencing things that maybe some kids didn't get to do for a number of years later. Like, for example, when parents paid for them to have a dorm room and they were away from the family, you could get away with that.
That was a different experience in high school. Because when we went to high school, we all lived with our family.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're out in university, particularly if you go to a school away from where you grew up, you're completely detached from your family. So you're kind of on your own to a degree. You have your own room. You have to do your own laundry.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was just different growing up in our house. My mom worked. She had a big career. My dad worked, and we had 6 brothers and sisters, and so I sort of had that already growing up. So being the middle child, I did the laundry for the house. I cut the grass, and I made dinner, and I did the shopping, and so those were sort of my responsibilities as well at home. So going to Whitman, not only was I having fun at school, but I was also sort of maybe helping my younger brothers and sisters. I think they're really grateful even today that, I was there for them during those Whitman years, making meals and taking care of the house and so forth. But once I went away to school when I was working full time, going to Maryland, my dad said, "Oh, you don't have to cut the grass anymore." So that went to my brother Mike, who, he took care of the house for years after that. I think even up until, when we sold the house recently, Mike was going over there and raking the leaves. It was a big yard, so a big job to take care of that house.
It sounds like you graduated with a Bachelor of Arts.
Bachelor of Science.
Bachelor of Science in Business Administration.
In Business Administration, okay. In finance with a minor in information systems.
Okay. Yeah, I thought the business admin was more on the Bachelor of Arts degree, not the Bachelor of Science. So
yeah, I don't know.
So
the diploma says Bachelor of Science, for whatever that's worth.
I understand that University of Maryland has tens of thousands of undergrad students. The time you attended that school, did you ever feel overwhelmed or kind of lost when you were over on campus?
No, I didn't. I think maybe because of the break at the good private schools I went to, the break I had at Whitman. I think we had 600 or 700 in our graduating class, so that was already a good size for me. And so when I went to Maryland, they had classes that could have 300 people in it, and it was relatively unstructured. But maybe Whitman was unstructured as well. And so that really prepared me for that. But because I sort of had the break at Whitman, and I really had fun and made a lot of friends, or at least I feel like many of the people we're talking to now are my friends. Mm-hmm. I had a break, and I was ready to go after it. So I think I wasn't adjusted in my first semester at Maryland. I think in my first semester I actually got on academic probation. And I just didn't do well, and so I woke up. I said, "Well, hey, wait a minute."
Sorry, you got on academic probation
in my very first semester at Maryland.
Oh, sorry, Maryland.
At Maryland, right. Not at Whitman. I'm sorry if I said that. No, at Whitman, I never got in trouble at all with anyone, as far as I know, and and it was mostly just a good time to socialize. But at Maryland, I tried to do the same thing I've been doing at Whitman. I just tried to continue the party, and that wasn't going to work. So in just one semester in, I said, hey, I'm paying for this, and I got to make something out of it. And I just self-corrected. I just said, you know what, no more long hair, no more partying. I'm just put my nose to the grindstone, and I did. I ended up getting on the dean's list, and I ended up doing well.
So you turned it around.
I sort of reinvented myself, as it were. Right. And so Whitman was an anomaly. So if you knew me from Whitman, I was one Jack Dietz, and so before Whitman, I was a different Jack Dietz, and after Whitman, I became yet another guy. And Whitman was almost like a break.
I seem to remember, in my own personal experience, pledging a fraternity was a time-consuming activity, and I wasn't on academic probation, but I got poor grades, and I had to step it up. And so the next semester, a little following your experience, that I was at the library a lot. I presume you were at the library a lot, after that semester.
I lived at the library. There was a undergraduate library, but I discovered the graduate library, which was called McKeldin, and I was fascinated. It had books in there that were hundreds of years old, and it had quiet study areas, and it seemed like, it was really much more focused on academia. So I basically lived at McKeldin or at the Student Union, and parking the car in Lot 4, which was like a mile away from campus, and a lot of exercise going from Lot 4 to the main campus, and so it was hard though. It was, I was working full time and going to school. So
and where were you working again?
it was called Crestwood Press,
right.
and I was in they had a manufacturing facility in Silver Spring where they manufactured publications, and I was in their corporate office, which was on Veers Mill Road, and so I was their accountant. So I did their receivables and payables and payroll, and it was all done the old-fashioned way.
What, double entry with these sheets of paper?
Yeah. And they had an adding machine that you would punch numbers into, and then you pull a crank, and it would push tape out the top. And they had these ledgers, paper that you would write on that had prongs that stick out in a big hard cover, and double entry. You'd add a bunch of sheets up, and so that's where I sort of started with accounting.
And so, what was your first job after graduating university now?
Yeah, I got a place at a real estate company called the Cathedral Corporation, and they were building a real estate development called River Place in Arlington, and it's in Roslyn. And so I was working there, and I was working there during that U.S. Airways accident where that airplane hit the bridge. And actually
that was near a Christmas event, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. My office overlooked.
Go ahead. I'm just
my office overlooked the bridge, and you could see that, but it was such a snowy day, you couldn't see very far. You could see the blinking of the lights off in the distance.
And that was in 82 or 83, something like that.
Yeah, that's right. Must have been
right. I remember because I flew that day. I flew out to visit my grandmother in, I guess it was Tampa Bay I flew into. It was almost the same flight, but it wasn't the same flight. I mean, it was the same, source and destination, but it was just a different flight I took that day.
Yeah.
But that was U.S. Air that went in? I
think that's right.
Yeah.
U.S. Airways. Yeah. And then, somebody, so I had gotten my CPA during this time. So right out of school, I went and I studied for the CPA, and there was a guy named Jim Bora, and I took his CPA review class. And I made friends with Jim, and I made friends with his son, who I'm not sure where he went to school, but they lived over in Carteret. And so Jim just sort of kept track of me, and he said, well, where are you working? And there's an opening at a CPA firm, and Counselor Buchanan and Mitchell in Bethesda. So after a year over at the Cathedral Corporation, I got hired by Mr. McLinden at Counselor Buchanan and Mitchell. So I went over there and I started doing their computer work. And they said, hey, I understand you have a little background in computers.
So as far as writing software or using software?
Yeah, all that, So so when I was at the Cathedral Corporation, they had an office, maybe 20 or 30 people doing rent rolls. And they were all doing it the old-fashioned way. And they sort of laughed at me that I wasn't as fast as them. And they said, well, there's this new technology that's come out, and it's called the Apple IIe, and it was running the CPM operating system. So they actually gave me this in a program called VisiCalc, and they said, do rent rolls on VisiCalc, which is today it's the Excel. But in those days, it was Multiplan or VisiCalc, and became Lotus 123, and eventually became known as Excel. So, but on the computers before the PC, they were Apple IIs. Mm-hmm. And they were these, very basic machines. But I started beating the people who were doing the rent rolls because the computers, you didn't have to add the numbers. The computers did that part of it for you. Right. All you had to do was the data entry. And then if something was off, the computers helped you to find it. And so
whereas if you made a mistake on paper, you'd have to basically almost start over again.
In a way, they would do it in sections, and so, but essentially money would come in, and you'd have to figure out which unit it belonged to, and then it had to tie to the deposit in the bank. And that was a huge exercise in property management. So by doing it in a spreadsheet, it sounds simple, but the really fascinating thing for me is that I was a new kid, and all the older people just sort of had fun with the new kid that I wasn't as fast as them. And they'd say, well, kid, you need to take phone books home and add telephone numbers on your adding machine. I was trying to do that. I take telephone books.
As practice.
As practice, yeah. And I was learning, and I still can do a 10 key today, but they were really good at it. They've been doing it for years. And until I could sort of come up to their speed, I wasn't part of their club. But so they gave me the Apple IIe, and actually it proved and demonstrated at that time that a computer could do things a lot better than the way it had been done in the office. So I did that. So I gained a reputation working with computers. So I went over to Council Buchanan Mitchell. They said, well, you know what? We're going to provide loans to our managers to buy the very first computer that's available on the market. And I think it was $2,000. We're going to give you a loan to the managers. And I said, I want in on that. And so I was the only...
So they would give you a loan so you could personally buy a computer.
That's right. Okay. And so I took one of the loans. So all the managers bought these very first computers. These were the IBM computers, the very first ones.
And was this the PC?
This was the PC. And but they looked like a sewing machine. So they sort of this white case with a handle on top, and the bottom would flip down, and it would be a keyboard. It had a little monitor in there and a couple of... They didn't even have hard drives. They had floppies, a little disc that you could put in there and close the door on. They had two of them. And that was the very first computers, $2,000. And I got a loan from American Security Bank, paid it off over 2 or 3 years. But the thing is, I was the only staff member who got a computer. Well, it actually changed my life because they started giving me all their computer work, and they were doing real estate syndications. There was a big real estate developer in DC called the Oliver T. Carr Company, and they started giving me the real estate syndications. So I worked on very important, well-known real estate projects, doing the sort of the accounting back-end analysis part, and it was all done with computers. It was done with this new program called Lotus 123, and it's sort of the replacement for multi-plane and VisiCalc.
There's something to it because you have to set up those spreadsheets.
Well, they were set up by the people at the Oliver T. Carr. I was auditing the spreadsheets, so I got to learn from really good, smart people who put these things together, how they did it, and then basically I had to review to make sure their calculations made sense. And so, and that sort of led into Burns McClendon, he wanted a database system. So he got me to start studying, what was Excel, Lotus 123. But then he wanted me to learn DBase, which was a programming language. And I did, and I mastered it. And so DBase had a compiler, it was called Clipper. So I had already at Maryland done Fortran and COBOL. So I started doing basic programming and DBase and Clipper, and I got good at it. And they had a client, and so I also did audits. So I did audits of different property management companies like Leisure World, and some condo associations, and some not-for-profits. Like, for example, I worked on Planned Parenthood and some different not-for-profit audits. But mostly it was the computer work that I was doing and installing accounting software for them. That was the thing back before IT companies did this. Public accounting firms in those days were the ones that people went to for their accounting software. So I was doing that, and I was having a good time doing it. But they had a client, a broker-dealer in Rockville, who had written a self-clearing software for a broker-dealer in DBase. And it was an audit client of mine. And so they had gotten to a point where they had sort of needed to put a lot of energy into their internal in-house accounting software. So they talked to Council Buchanan Mitchell, and they hired me full-time, and I spent 1 year writing a DBase program for a broker-dealer. And it was a big significant... So this guy, Calvin Kuntz, owned the company. He was just a brilliant scientist, and he had thought through all the calculations, but he must have had 100 programs that didn't talk to each other, that did different parts of the broker-dealer business. He explained it all to me, and I weaved it together to create a daily settlement. So 100 programs coming together. There were different programs programs. There'd be
So you could exercise everything from a common menu tree. Is that
right,
how you did it?
and all the transactions. He was brilliant. He had already done it, but it didn't link. And
so it did indiscrete pieces, is what you mean?
Yeah, they didn't integrate. So
Right.
basically, I took on a project and integrated them, so you could press a button that would say, "Here's your sort of your numbers for the day." And at a broker dealer, it's almost required by law you do that. And it's a very complicated system, a broker, because you're moving stocks that have value, you're moving money, and they have value, and then stocks change from the day that they sell to the day that they settle. There's a 7-day period. So you're moving a lot of things. So it's a very complicated system. But so I wrote that, and after a year I was done. And again, another person at a big public accounting firm called Laventhal and Horwath said, "Hey, we're doing takeovers of savings and loans, and we're using DBase and Fortran, and we're using BASIC and all the programming skills you have, but you need to be an accountant." So I went to work for a national public accounting firm.
Sorry, what year was this?
Oh gosh, I don't even know now. Some it was in the 80s, I guess, you know.
Sounds like late 80s.
Yeah, late 80s. And so it was the late 80s, 87, 88, takeovers of all the savings and loans. So I did that. So I became a federal contractor working for a public accounting firm, working for the Resolution Trust Corporation, the FDIC, the FSLIC. I flew all over the country doing takeovers of savings and loans. I was actually worked on Silverado, which was the Bush family organization. It was the federal savings and loan of the Bush family. And so that was a S&L failure. And so we go in, take over the offices and everything. So I was sitting in the CEO's office, and I think it was Neil Bush's chair in his office, doing programming for the takeover of the savings and loan. So it was a little bit like Whitman though, because all these sort of young CPAs came together, and hundreds of folks, and we were all working hard, but we all played hard, and it was a little bit reverting back to the Whitman days. So I did that for a number of years, and then what happened was, karma. You got to believe in karma.
Karma.
Yeah, Laventhal. They're taking over savings and loans, right?
Right.
But they end up going out of business. They end up. I don't know if you remember Channel 20 and the PTL Club.
I remember Channel 20, yeah.
They had this thing called
off on River Road somewhere.
Yeah, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker had a big program. They called it,
Right.
I don't know, the PTL Club.
Right.
And they built this real estate project called Heritage USA, which was a senior living facility. They got all these people to invest in it through their religious program. Well, what no one really understood was their religious program was really a real estate syndication program, and they were getting people to invest in a pyramid scheme. And they never actually built Heritage USA.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was the audit agency, the firm I worked for, they forgot to do one thing. They forgot to audit the books. And so anyway, they got in trouble for that. And Jim Baker,
He was criminally indicted.
he goes to jail,
Right.
but Laventhal and Horwath and their 10,000 CPAs close their doors over this. And so then a few Laventhal people and myself started a consulting business that I ended up running for 16 years.
Did you, with these people, you incorporated this corporation?
That's right.
And you were an owner at this point?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it went through different iterations. So we got out with a couple of Laventhal folks, and little by little, we just weren't generating enough revenue. So they were off going out and finding better jobs. But I stuck with it, and I created Good Deeds accounting software. And I ended up was looking for ways to feed the company business, and that was through a Microsoft relationship. So I ended up becoming a Microsoft certified partner, and I ran that business for 16 years. And I sold, at first I sold Data Pro accounting software, then I started selling Great Plains accounting software. And I used my programming skills, and I did programming for Washington area businesses. Mostly it was not-for-profits and trade associations, but I had commercial businesses that did distribution, manufacturing, So I used my accounting skills and my programming skills, and I did well. I ended up with an internal role with Microsoft called the Customer Sales Manager, and I won in 2 different years their top sales award. And so I went to a lot of training with Microsoft, so I reinvented myself again, and I essentially became a salesperson. Meanwhile, all at the same time, all of this, I had the family business. So mom and dad continued to be realtors.
And this was property management?
They always had a property management business. It was always a sort of a string that ran through our lives, but mom and dad were in sales, so they were selling real estate, and they would ask me to help them. So in the early days, I'd put up signs, and then eventually, now I'm actually holding houses open. So I actually got a real estate sales license, and
What year was that, Jeff?
Gosh, it was early, like 1990 or something.
Okay.
So I got a real estate license then, because you have to have a license to do this.
Right, in the state of Maryland.
In the state of Maryland, that's right. And so, but it was mostly just doing whatever mom said. And she was very successful. Mom was one of the top realtors in Montgomery County. And the rest of my family members, my sister Suzanne ended up marrying a guy named David Hillman, and today she owns a company called Southern Management Corporation. It's a very big property management real estate firm. So a lot of the family, stayed in real estate and so forth. And so I continued my journey as a CPA. And so eventually I decide that the Microsoft thing, it's not doing what I want it to do. So I go to work for, so I actually sell that business, and I had like 300 customers now. I actually sold that business to a public accounting firm.
And of your customers, was it customers of software that you resold? You were saying you were selling Great Plains.
Yeah, so what would happen is Microsoft rep, you were on a commission basis, so you would own accounts. So if I sold the account, or if I was given as a customer sales manager, they would also give me their troubled accounts. So I did some really cool things. I actually wrote the back end for eBay's charitable giving tool, which is called Mission Fish. So I got some really cool jobs. I worked for some very well-known organizations, and so essentially I was a consultant, and I had a small business. We had at one time maybe 8 people. So I was making a go of it, but eventually the people who did really well were the much larger organizations. So, Microsoft was trying to get the little guy, me, to merge with bigger guys, and I just decided I wanted to reinvent myself again. So I actually sold my 300 customers to a public accounting firm, and I went to work for the United Way. And
what year was that?
This was in 2005.
Right. I seem to remember Microsoft was shedding small business partners, right? And they were trying to consolidate to larger companies.
That's what was happening.
Yeah.
And they were so good at it that it didn't make any sense for me to keep representing their products. So because they took the money out of it. So they were making their products a lot more affordable for the average customer, which was, they had a good business strategy for them. But for the way the economics were set up for a person like myself, there were just too many things working against you if you hadn't made it big. You had to be, there was a certain size, you had to be a certain sales figure you had to have, sort of almost as a barrier to entry. And the little consulting firm, if it didn't have that, it wasn't sustainable. There were too many requirements, and the profits just weren't there, and the marketing costs were too big. So I threw in the towel. And even looking back on, since I threw the towel, the other sort of my peers, everybody else did the same thing. So there's none of those little guys that are in existence today. And back in those days, that's the way it was done. But now it's done a different way. And even now, it's all gone to subscription service. People pay $50 a month or something like that for software. So there's not a lot of commission on $50 a month.
You have to have a lot of install base to make sense
Yeah, you would.
from that model.
So I became a CFO working for the United Way, and that got me into international development work.
Right, okay.
And I worked there for a while, and then I went to work for another organization doing international development, and they gave me the opportunity to fly around the world. So I went to war zones. I went to the world's poorest countries. I spent a lot of time in Africa and in Asia and Europe, and so I really got to see, you know, the world's poorest, most needy folks, and really changed my heart. I mean, I don't think I'd be the person today if I hadn't done that, because, you know, you could talk about it all day long, but until you actually go there and coexist with these folks, and I did. And I think the shortest, quickest way to get there is I met these folks, and they wanted me to come to their house, and I was like, oh, well, it's scary. I don't know if I want to do that, but I did. And so the way you'd have to see this was in Sierra Leone, and they had had a big war. And the closest thing you could see as being from here, being an American, is going to Williamsburg. So all of their houses were like those Williamsburg homes. I mean, they were still, the entire place called Freetown, their city, is basically just like all the houses in Williamsburg, like those colonial era buildings. And they truly were. I mean, they had built those colonial era homes, and that's what they were living in. The only thing is that they had gone through a war, and most of those houses had burnt down, and they put the fires out. So all that was left was about half the house. And then the development companies gave them blue tarps. So they had taken these houses that were only half a house, and the roof was gone, and some of the wall was there, and the chimneys were there, and some of the houses didn't burn down, but a lot of them did. And they put these tarps over them. So I went to this village, and I went inside this little house about the size of this room, or half the size of this room. They had 10 people living in there, so, you know, people stacked on top of each other. And I sat on the floor. They didn't have any furniture, and they had a small bowl of rice, and they wanted to share that bowl of rice with me. I sat on the floor, but they were so grateful, and they were so nice, and they were just so thankful that I came and sat on the floor and shared that bowl of rice with them. But that's all they had to share. And they didn't want anything. They didn't ask me for anything. They just wanted me to come and sit there with them, and, you know, and meet their family members. And so the one big thing that you could learn about many of these places overseas is how family oriented they are. And another thing is we were driving around, and the country director says, "Well, that's my uncle." And he told me about that about 20 times. I didn't know what he was saying. He said, "Well, I've told you that this guy's my uncle 20 times. Don't you want to know why?" I said, "Well, I guess he's your uncle." He said, "No." He said, "You know, when I was 5 years old, I was walking by his store, and he cut hair. And he's not my uncle. He just cut hair. And he would say, 'Hey, boy, come in here. I'm going to cut your hair.' And he says, 'Well, I didn't have any money.'" But that's how they are in these places. He would just cut his hair. And so once that barber got old and couldn't work any longer, the 5-year-old boy who became a man was now responsible for this man, this barber, in his old age. So he would, you know, provide for him in whatever way he could. So the country director would be taking care of like 50 people. So his salary, you might think, oh, he's making a lot of money. Well, that money is going to take care of 50 people. And so they're just very family oriented, very nice people. And anyway, I just had a really great time. And so lots of stories, but I traveled all over the world. I went to Indonesia. I got to go to great places, like I think the Buddhist temple is what's called, I'm going to not say the name right, it's Borobudur, I believe is the name of the temple. It's the largest Buddhist temple in the world. And it was covered by volcanic ash. You couldn't even see it. This thing's like 10 or 12 stories high. And they took away all the ash, and now it's a World Heritage Site. And I climbed that through the 7 layers. And I felt like it was almost a life experience for me, like my own personal journey of going through these stages and finally reaching the top, which is, you know, nirvana. And when you get to the very top, it's beautiful. But there's a part of it you can't enter, because that's the way life is. The final journey you can't enter. So that's the way the building is. But in each sort of stage of enlightenment that you have in your life, that's the way the temple was built. So I got to go to that. I went to work for
You were in Indonesia for work-related reasons, though.
Right.
But you just saw this temple as part of that,
Yeah, it was like a little side visit that you get when you go to work in these places. They let you take little days off and you do these little field trips. And so I got to go to, Bali, and so I got little field trips, and this was a day. And there was also a Hindu temple that's really well known. I got to go to that, but the Borobudur was fascinating. I think it's the most famous of all the Buddhist temples, and it's beautiful. And but it was that activity of climbing this 12-story building, and they have these sort of levels of thought that you can't ascend to the next story until you've achieved a certain event in your life. And I may have done it in one day, but it had deeper meaning than that. It was really about the journey that we all go through and enlightenment, and so I learned that in Africa and Asia. So when I was in Indonesia, I was now at a different NGO, and they were growing coffee and spice. So I made a video. It's out on YouTube. You can go search for it, and it's about growing coffee. So I got to be an expert at how coffee is grown, and again, just meeting these wonderful people and learning their stories, and I really enjoyed that, and I learned a lot. So then that brought me back to the States, and I kept working for not-for-profits and doing different things. And so my journey as a CPA and working for not-for-profits today, I'm working for a government contractor as a CPA.
Is that what you're doing now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's just so it's sort of, again, I'm transitioning again. So I've had that long journey of being in real estate. I've done that.
How did you connect with this government contractor?
Yeah, it's always, hey, Jack, I have this
word of mouth.
Yeah, it's all word of mouth. Hey, I have this friend, and they need. So it's maybe the easiest CPA job I ever had, the one I'm doing now, and it's sort of working for a person who started a business, and they needed somebody who could do that for me. It's my journey has moved on more to real estate and less of the sort of going to the office downtown every day. And so again, I'm reinventing myself again, but I'm doing more real estate today, and I'm having fun with that. I've been licensed as a real estate agent since the 90s and helped mom and dad, and I've created my own business. I can...
In that area, what can you help people with regarding real estate?
Well, I'm a great property manager, so if somebody needs somebody to manage their property, I could do that. I can be a listing agent. I can help you sell your home. I can be a buyer agent if you're looking for the right property. One thing I can do is I can help you visit if you have a limited budget, but yet you want to be in that very expensive Maryland, Montgomery County area. I can help you find a property and visualize how you might change it into what, get in the door with something and then change it into what you want. I've done a lot of construction. My father and mother, they would flip houses, so I would flip houses. I continue to flip houses today.
So somebody had the model in their mind of buying an older property and visualizing it and, gutting it out and renovating it. That's something that you would feel comfortable helping out with.
Yeah, and I have the resources too. I have. I just finished building a brand new home in Bethesda. It was listed for $1.8 million. It has all the bells and whistles. It has all the things that a new home in Bethesda would have. So, I was the general contractor. I built that. So I went through all the pains of, everything you got to know to do something like that, all the laws and all the permits and, the working with all the utilities and then the contractors. And so I built a beautiful house. It's in Glen Echo Heights, or some people call it Mohican Hills. It's actually Glen Echo Heights off Sangamore Road and down by Glen Echo Amusement Park.
So if somebody wanted to look through Street View, do you have an address that they could look at Street View? See this
yeah, that house is at 6204 Madawaska Road. Yeah, you could probably just go to my website, www.gooddeeds.com. You can also see it there. And it has a little bit of history about me there. And, but I'm just having fun. So I'm, COVID the past year, working a lot from home, working online. I have a vacation home in Rehoboth. I'm spending some time down there.
In fact, I'm interviewing you in that home.
Yeah.
I should tell the audience that we're in Jack's home in Rehoboth Beach.
We are, and I'm just enjoying the heck out of that. And I've got a multi-flavored life. I'm starting another big real estate project next month, so I have something new in the hopper in terms of another development project. I volunteer. I'm on a board of seniors called the Beater Senior Centers. They do multi-family housing for seniors. They also run like a sort of, I don't know how to describe it, a daycare, if you will, for seniors. And I've helped them with PPP loans and accounting and financials. And so I dabble in real estate, and I can help,
Well, tell me about this real estate project you have on the go, or that you're starting. What's the scope of work involved in that?
Yeah, in real estate, you got to kind of keep your cards to yourself on these things. But essentially, I have a new project, and it's a sort of renovation flip. And this one is a multifamily property, and I intend to rent it. So it's a matter of getting a property that's one thing, changing it into something slightly different, and then maximizing rents. And so it's an investment property, and I can help people who want to do that, find properties like that and do something like that. I can help you find them, and I can help you figure out what you need to get that done.
Like even something as simple as turning a basement into a livable space or something like that to rent out.
Yeah, and some of these things are shades of gray. There's sort of, you can almost call it, NGOs call it a dance. So when you're doing federal contracting, they call it a dance because there's all these laws and so forth, and you have to comply with them. And yet at the same time, there's some flexibility that's sort of unspoken. If it ever comes up, they say, oh, no, it's all these strict rules. But in truth, there's shades of gray. There's areas where, that there's the, officially what's the record. I think basement rentals sort of fall into that category, exactly how does that work and how do you manage it and what's the law and all that. So there are shades of gray there that you can work with that I guess lots of people work with. Can they be a legal rental? And if you look in one place, no, you can never be. The ceiling height has to be a certain number of inches and this and that and the other thing. And
the windows and how they're positioned.
Now that's a harder...
And fire concerns, things like that.
Yeah, well those things you'd want to make sure you got right, so those things I do know. So you definitely want to make sure you have two exits and that you're meeting code for egress, which is exits. Right. And some of that is fairly strict. And in the house I built, the inspector failed the second floor windows. He said, well, you don't have proper egress here. And I was like, well, wait a minute, I have an architect, da-da-da-da-da. And so when I called the architect and the window manufacturer back, they said, well, Jack, there's a little button that you press. And I was like, well, where is this little magic button? And they showed me the magic button. And if you press the little magic button on the window, it actually has a wider opening. And they don't do that as a matter of course because of different reasons they have. They're like, well, we don't want people to fall out or, this kind of thing. But if you press this little button, the window actually flies all the way open and provides the legal egress, the government. So I showed that to the building inspector and, oh yeah, fine. I guess he was expecting I knew where the magic button was when he came by. Those are the things you actually have to learn to do real estate. You have to know the windows have these magic buttons that you can press and they have a wider opening. And I guess it's something you just have to learn. The inspectors they're testing you to see if you know about that, I guess. And once you know it for life, and but there's a lot you have to know in real estate, a lot of things. And so I have a family business from the time I was very young doing it. There's a lot I know, and I could help members of this community if they needed help with something like that.
Members of the Walt Whitman alumni community.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But in any case, I'm really delighted that we had this time together and to reconnect. And I feel like all the Whitman folks are my friends, and feel free to contact me, and we can grab a cup of coffee and go over old times. There's plenty of things we didn't talk about today.
Sure.
And it was a long time ago. A lot of it I just don't remember. And because, I've done so much, travel around the world and done so many different things. I remember very little of what Whitman was, except for it was fun, and that I met a lot of good people, and I've reinvented myself several times since then. And the time in international development, it gave me a different view of the world. The climbing the Indonesian temple, that was the sort of a description of going through different phases of your life, and getting to the top, and getting to that port you can't enter until the next journey. I'm down here in Rehoboth. I'm just having a good time, and but I'm traveling back to D.C. and to Bethesda, Maryland all the time. But COVID has me down here at the beach, at least for this part of the journey.
Well, hopefully that's going to be starting to wrap up as the vaccine gets distributed.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that,
But I'd like to tell our audience that anybody has any inquiries about this interview, this alumni profile with Jack, can reach out through the website. There are contact forms to fill it out, and we can get a message, get you hooked up with Jack Dietz. Thank you for spending your afternoon with me.
Yep.
And participating with alumni profiles.
Oh, well, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for the opportunity to connect back, and I'm just sending my love and joy and hope to all the members out there. You guys stay safe. 2021 is here, and it's going to be a great year.
Absolutely. Cheers.